Hi, everybody. Welcome to Patrick's Scale Studio. My name is Patrick, and I'll be your host. So, first of all, I'd like to wish everyone that had or I hope everyone that had a holiday in between when you started following me and today, hope everyone had a good holiday. If you've got any upcoming holidays, I hope those are good as well. And I also hope you have an excellent New Year's. Hopefully, we'll get another video up here before the new year. But in case that doesn't happen, Happy New Year. Um, so we are going on to the build video 5 of the USS Curtis Wilbur guided missile destroyer 54, and it's in 1/200 scale, and it's by I Love Kit. So last I left you, we had the hull completely mounted to our temporary build base. We had red primer. I put some gray primer up here. I don't think you didn't see any of that. And at the end of that, I said we would be working next on getting the decks fitted eventually and getting some of the pieces added to the decks. And additionally, we would be working on getting the hull painted, or I would be working on getting the hull painted. But since it's probably not thrilling to watch hours and hours of airbrushing, um, figured I'd just go ahead and tell you how I achieved what effects and the looks that I did through airbrushing. And then also because the kit's got 1,300 plus parts, it might be a little difficult to make a video for every time I attach a piece into where it goes. So with that, probably continue on here with maybe a couple steps per build video, along with showing you what was accomplished and any tricky parts along the way that you need to watch out for. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here with so far what I've done on the hull. As you can see, it's not complete because it doesn't have the hull red on the bottom with the black waterline stripe running down it. But I did finally get the last coat of gray on for right now as far as the base coat. And if you look, you might see some striations running vertically the entire length of the hull. And they really show up down here against the red. So you might think, man, what kind of airbrush does he have? That's terrible. Well, it wasn't the airbrush, and I did it on purpose. Um, and the reason I did it is if this was just one slab of gray, one slab of red, that would look pretty boring. And real ships out at sea have streaking all the time. There's weather, water hitting the ship. You're going to have salt streaks. So this is kind of a advanced move here to give this gray paintwork a little bit more of an interesting finish. So what I did was I had some Vallejo light ghost gray primer, and I put my water line on there, and I sprayed the Vallejo light ghost gray primer on there, just to kind of give me a visual of how it would look here with the gray and the red below it. And it was a sharp line. And then also I did that because I knew that covering up this whole red Vallejo primer would be very difficult with gray. I'd have to add a lot of paint, and I mean a lot of paint to be able to cover that up. As you can see, it's not really covered here where it's going to be gray, or I'm sorry, where it's going to be red eventually. That's because I just left the red primer there. But for the gray portions of the hull, on top of the light ghost gray, I used Tamiya XF24 dark gray. And I used this in a teeny tiny little spray pattern. I had my air pressure dialed way back. I had the paint pretty heavily thinned, and I very, very fine airbrushing around all of these little detail bits. So all that does really is begin the shadows. It's called a pre-shading technique. And I just kind of highlight everything around around all the little portholes, the scuttles, all these little bumps, um, all the little features on the hull that stand out from the side. So after I finished off with that, I had a really nice dark gray contrast. In fact, the contrast was so good it almost looked black, um, but a real good strong contrast. Afterwards, I took Tamiya's XF66 light gray, and I really heavily thinned this down to about 1 part paint to 2 parts thinner. Um, and then I took that and I kind of broadly sprayed that on, but I started using up and down motion as I was spraying it on, and from time to time a side to side for a couple areas. Like you might be able to see toward the hole here, or toward the bow, where you can kind of see a little bit of horizontal streaking. Um, and so what that did was help blend in that pre-shading, so it didn't look so stark. And then after that, and then I finally got around to using my final color, which was the Tamiya's XF12, the Japanese navy gray, which was a much lighter shade. Very nice though. And this I used very fine up and down lines all along the hole at first. And again, the paint was heavily thinned, 1 part paint, 2 parts thinner. But I up and down the hole quite a bit and quite close. So I got a lot of really, really close together fine lines. And then I backed it off a little bit and sprayed back to kind of blend it all in. So that's where we get those striations from. You can see a little bit better in certain lights. You can see it better depending on which way you're looking at it. There's almost certain sheen that kind of shows up here and there depending on which angle you're looking at the hull. I really like where that's at right now. So after this fully cures, I'm going to mark the water line. I'm going to mask it off, and then I'm going to paint our black waterline stripe next. After that has time to cure, and I might even give that a little bit of variation, then I'm going to mask off down to where the hull red will begin, and we'll put in the hull red. And again, we're going to do that with Tamiya's XF9 hull red, and that's going to go down as a base, kind of brown, and then we'll move on to a combination of that and Tamiya's XF red, flat red. I'm sorry, XF7 flat red, to kind of brighten this up a little bit. That's the plans for the hull. And with that in mind, we will move on to what I've accomplished so far here with actually building some of the pieces that go onto the deck. So as we start looking here in the instruction manual past what it was we already did with the hull, we can actually go back to step one, the very first step, which we skipped. And in that, we're going to be putting some bits and bobs there on the rear portion of this main deck piece. We're going to be putting some Photo-etch in there also. And then eventually that gets mounted down. We just slap that down right now. It'd be very hard to add some of these pieces, especially since some of these attach to the bottom of that main deck piece. So for step one, you're going to need the D sprue. You're going to need both K sprues. And yeah, it's a little bit easier for me to see if I take a little piece of Tamiya tape and mark the letter there in black Sharpie, rather than try to read this against gray. So we'll also need the L sprue and the Q sprue. And then we will need both B Photo-etch frets, both C Photo-etch frets, and the D Photo-etch fret. So as with doing any Photo-etch work, it's going to be handy to have a Photo-etch bending tool, either this or something handheld. Tamiya makes a set of something that looks like pliers, and it's made specifically for bending Photo-etch. It's also good to have a very hard surface to cut the pieces out against so you don't deform the brass. Of course, you'll need your regular sprue cutters for cutting the plastic pieces off, various sanding sticks, X-Acto knife. I use the curved one specifically for photo etch. Tweezers. Yeah, every now and then I find the chisel blade on a large X-Acto knife to be helpful and handy. Sanding sponge, and I also use a wax pencil for any teeny tiny little parts. I have to apply super glue or something like that to a part, and then I can pick up that tiny little photo etch part with this, just the tip of this, and stick it on. And as soon as the super glue grabs hold of it, you can pull the pencil away without any damage or fear from damage with tweezers, X-Acto blade, anything like that. So we already started here with the first subassembly on page 1, and it was just for pretty quick parts. Let's see if we can get that in focus here. That's better. All right, and if you can see my fingers and my thumb for size reference there, you can see how tiny they are. There is this tiny little photo etch part there, this tiny little hose bundle right there, and I think this is a loudspeaker of some sort. And this was actually the part that gave me the most trouble of all as far as cleaning it up goes. And you can see kind of on this sprue how many of those there are and how many of those little hose bundles there are. But these aren't too bad. If you use your sprue cutters and you cut really close to them, you might have a tiny little bit of cleanup here at the top. But with these, because it's a rounded bell shape, cleanup on that was a lot more difficult. So with that out of the way, the next step would be to attach a bunch of tiny little parts, including some photo etch, to this, and attach this there on the main deck piece. I'm not going to attach this right now. I'm going to get everything else attached there first, and then we'll put this on. One thing I noted here when I was cleaning up this is there was a couple of tiny little flash, bits of flash on the edges. And then also right here, there is a little bump of mold flash right there. So I'm going to have to sand that away in order to give that a really nice, clean look when I join these parts together. That does not tie into anything else. So I need to sand that away. So with that said, I will be back here in just a few seconds with a lot more on there. All right. First couple of gotchas here on the build today. So the instructions call for Q14. There's no Q14. You know why there's no Q14? Because the carpet monster ate Q14. You're like, wait. What's the carpet monster? Well, if you're new to this, you don't know what the carpet monster is. If you've been doing this for a while and you tell me you don't know what the carpet monster is, I know you're lying. It is a rule that applies to scale modeling in that if your build has tiny pieces like these, one of them is going to go pinging off into nowhere when you try cutting it off, or when you pick it up, you drop it, or when you use some tweezers to grab it and manipulate it, or you try sanding it. It's bound to happen. It happens to everybody. If you've done this before, you know what I'm talking about. Well, 14 was my first casualty. Luckily, there are enough of these tiny little pieces scattered throughout the rest of the build. Let's see if I can get something dark here to bring that into focus. So like if you see, sorry folks. part 19. That right there is just about an exact replica of what part 14 was and what we need. So I happen to have a piece of plastic that I was able to fabricate the replacement for 14 on. Um, yeah, sorry, it's not coming into focus very well. Not the greatest camera, but it's got the 3 holes in it that are called for in the instructions right there. So I was able to fabricate that. It's just a tiniest little piece of plastic. You can do so, with strip styrene. If you've got half of the little stubs that you might clip off of some of the larger parts have got enough plastic in it to do the trick. If you're good at drilling, you can 3D print one. If you've got any kind of molding materials like silicone molding, so you can pour your own resin molds. Then you can make a mold of one of the other small, tiny little parts and make a copy. The point to that is there are other pieces on here that look identical to that. The only issue with I Love Kit, Trumpeter, and Hobby Boss is what they give you is just enough. There's never extra. It's always just enough. So keep that in mind and try to take extra special precaution when dealing with a piece that's about a millimeter by 1.5 millimeter by a millimeter. Second gotcha here is, well, maybe more of a tip, is I put a clamp here on the main deck part so I could hold it. You can see these 3 brass pieces right there. They go on there, and there are going to be 3 more right there too. This clamp holds that nice and perpendicular to my work surface. So it's right there. I don't have to hold this or fiddle around or anything. It's already there. And then another thing is they're so small and tiny that you put a little CA glue on a toothpick, put it onto the part, and put the part onto that where that CA glue is, and some's bound to ooze out. So a while back, I picked up the Golden West Super Solvent for CA Instant Glues, and I just use a ratty old brush. Just pour a little bit of this into a beer cap or something like that, and then I can take this and just gently work off any excess glue that happened to ooze outside of the parts. I also like to use, when I'm dealing with small photo etch like that, is the black CA glue. AK makes the Black Widow, but Bob Smith Industries also makes a version of that. This isn't it, but they do make a version of it, and I also have that and use that from time to time as well. Just usually whatever's at hand. But the nice thing about those black super glues is typically they're a medium or they're a thick blend, so it gives you plenty of work time to get those tiny little pieces exactly where you want. And that's the case here with these because, as you can see, you want them all to line up. If they don't line up, then it's definitely going to look off when you put paint on there. And then two, it allows you to see exactly where the excess glue is because it's oozed out because it's not, of course, between the 2 parts that you're joining. So when you are able to see that, you're able to take some of the solvent and you're able to clean it up and then move on with your build. Okay, the last part of this here before we do any closure on this video is going to be discussing the photo etch that comes in the I Love kit. So far, this kit's been fantastic. There's no model kit I've ever come across, though, that gets 100%. Gets 95, 96, 97%. But in this case, the photo etch is really what is kind of failing this kit, and it's right off the bat on the first page. Some of the flat pieces are great. Shows a lot of nice little detail. You'll see it's that piece right there, that PE D26. It's nice. It's fantastic detail. But these right here make no sense. There's in the front and the back. And what those are supposed to designate is the vertical launch tubes for the Tomahawk missiles. The problem with that, though, is this is the bottom of the hull. So these are sticking out this way. There's going to be a hole that's right over all this right here. You'll never see this detail. Now, if you go to the next page here, or next 2 pages, sorry, you're going to put some doors in place. And the front one is closed, so you couldn't even show it open in that tube down there if you follow the instructions as the kit's got it designed. And there's something similar in the back where it's opened. The only problem with this is, again, all you're going to see is flat brass. You're thinking, no, 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 look at all that nice etching on the other side. Well, if you, again, follow the instructions that they've got it shown, all of that corrugation is on the exterior of these folds. You'll never see it. You're just going to see flat, shiny aluminum, or I'm sorry, flat, shiny brass if you look in there. And of course, you're going to paint it. But that makes no sense at all. That, and as you can see, I did the ones up front already, and as you'd say, I did them wrong because the corrugations are on the inside, because I was thinking it doesn't make any sense to put the corrugations on the outside if there's going to be a hole surrounding it. But sure enough, you can barely see in there. Barely at all. So there is absolutely no sense to putting those in there. But I will show you how those go together. Use a photo etch tool, bending tool if you absolutely must. But as you can see, I just barely tapped it with my finger and it started folding. And that comes to the other reason why the photo etch in this kit is awful when you have to fold it. And that's because, let's see if I can get this to show up against a dark background. That is 4 separate plates connected by thin, tiny little strings of brass. Just barely anything there at all holding that together. So when you fold this, you get gaps. Not pretty looking gaps either. They are pretty nasty looking gaps that you would have to fill with CA glue, or if you're good at soldering, you could solder it, but gaps nonetheless. If you wanted to show the launch tubes being loaded in, there's a picture on one of the links that I include as a resource in these videos that I use for real life pictures of the real life thing, and they are loading in the launch tubes. And it is corrugated just like this, but again on the outside, just like this, but you don't see any of that once it goes into the ship. If you absolutely wanted to do it and you wanted to use the kit parts to do it, I would recommend separating all of these panels and gluing them onto styrene. You have a much better, neater result without the gaps. But that's pretty much all it is. And then I Love Kit would have you glue that right in those spots like that. And then after it's glued in, be sure not to hit the bottom of this against anything hard. They don't break them off. But yeah, you can just barely make out the one in there. Can't really even see down in it. Not worth it at all in my opinion. I'm going to end up closing these up. If you wanted to show the vertical launch system and any kind of the missile system, I would wait until a aftermarket photo etch system is eventually released for the kit. The second part of my gripe with the photo etch portion of the kit, and again, makes no sense at all, comes to this part right here, PED75. And what this is supposed to turn into is the air traffic controller's window for the helicopter when it comes in for a landing. Again, because they use those teeny tiny little strings of brass, instead of just solid folds that you could use with that you could bend with a Photo-etch bending tool. This has got gaps all over the place. It looks horrific. And the reason why this part also makes absolutely no sense is these are supposed to be windows, but the most prominent windows on the kit up on the bridge are solid, absolutely solid. You're supposed to paint these in. So why they thought that would be the best choice to represent that particular detail instead of an accurately molded piece of plastic is beyond me. I don't know. But because that deformed so quickly on me, I went ahead and made my own solution using styrene. I got enough thickness of styrene glued together, and boy, that is just terrible resolution there. That's a little bit better on the photos. But I got enough thickness of styrene glued together, and then I cut incredibly thin strips of 0.12 millimeter styrene, very thin stuff, and was able to tack that along the edges to make it look like that. And so what I'll do is I will paint those windows in a similar fashion as to what I'm going to do with the bridge windows. So that is it for the parts for this step of the kit. I still have to glue this on, but where it stands right now is where we'll end this video, and that is right here. Here, let's get a little focus. It's hard to see because this bow is so long. There, it's a little bit better. But every piece there is potential meals for the carpet monster. Bear that in mind and be careful when handling these parts. For our next video, what we should have for you is going to be more color on the hull, at least having that black waterline stripe, possibly the whole red underneath it. We'll see where we go. And then we'll have a couple more steps here in our instruction booklet completed with the decks put in place. And I will, of course, take you along the way and point out some of the bending of the Photo-etch, any of these parts that might be particularly tricky. I thank you for joining me for this episode. As always, if you have any comments, concerns, questions about how I did something, or suggestions on how to do something, please feel free to leave that for me in the comments section. I'll be happy to get back to you or answer that, or even think about your suggestion and possibly move on it as well. Thank you again for joining me. Have a happy New Year.